Hello and welcome everyone to today's developer coaching webinar. My name is Tara Van Cleve and I'm part of the technical marketing organization here at Oracle. Today, we're excited to help you take your Apex workflows to the next level. We'll develop a simple yet powerful Apex app that contains a single workflow together. I'd also like to note that we are recording the webinar and you'll receive the replay via the same email that you registered with for today's event after the event concludes within the next few days. So if you do have any questions, we have enabled the Q&A section of the Zoom and we'll answer throughout the hour as well as leave some time at the end for any remaining open questions. So today's webinar will be presented by Pete Madura, Principal Cloud Architect, and Shane Jayawardene, Senior Cloud Engineer. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Pete first.
Thank you so much, Tara, and welcome everyone, and thanks for spending part of your day with us. My name is Pete Madura, and I'm an architect on the Code Innovate team here at Oracle. If you're not familiar with the Code Innovate program, I'll provide you some information at the end of this, so please stay tuned for that. So let's start off today by reviewing the use case and the flow of today's webinar. The best way I can sum up what we're coaching today is how to interact with Apex workflows outside of Apex. And we've got a simple agenda. I will start by creating a workflow that will kick off from within an existing application. I'll also be talking about some of the main components of a typical workflow, like task definitions, unified task lists, workflow consoles, and several Apex system views. Next, I'll switch over to SQL Developer Web and walk you through how to start a workflow from within the database, but without opening up Apex. I will also show how to set up a reoccurring schedule for this process. And my colleague Shane will wrap up the session to showcase how you can define an email that allows users to approve or reject a request directly from email. Now I want to just walk through today's premise to provide some context on the use case and discuss why you may want to start a workflow from outside of your application. Here's a premise. A process is needed to allow admins to request system access for users that need to be reviewed by a human. Pretty straightforward. For part one, I'll create a workflow that contains an approval task activity, and we'll enter a user's info and we'll initiate the workflow from within Apex. For part two, we'll launch SQL Developer Web and review a script that will call a REST endpoint, get a list of new users, then trigger our workflow for each new user entry. Now, I want to take an extra moment here to discuss our data source for the portion of the webinar. We're using an OCI identity group as our data source for demo purposes. And we're going to pretend that all users that get added to this group need to get their system access reviewed, and our fictitious workflow is going to handle the approval process. Now, this is where I want all attendees to put their thinking hats on. Our premise is simple, but the use cases are limitless. If you're doing the math, this means data from any local or external table within your Oracle database could be continuously queried, checking for new records, maybe looking for anomalies, searching for data quality issues. This also means that any data source that is REST enabled could be utilized in this process, which is what we'll be utilizing today. And for part three, Shane will take a copy of my workflow and walk you through the steps required to allow users to simply approve or reject a request directly from email, which is a great option to give your approvers. So let's get out of PowerPoint and let's start building. All right, so here we are in the workspace, and I'm running on an Oracle Autonomous 23 AI database. The Apex version is 24.2. And to save time, I've already created a page that has a text field to allow me to manually enter a username and a button to start the workflow. Let's take a quick look at that. So here's my very basic app. Here's my start workflow page. I just have one page item for the username and a button to start the workflow. Now there's no process behind here for the workflow. So we'll need to hook that up and add a page process once the workflow is created. So let's jump right into building our workflow. And it's always good practice to sketch out your desired workflow before you start developing it. This will typically save you a lot of rework. Now I'm going to start in task definitions under the shared components for my applications. Since most workflows will contain at least one human task, I like to create the task definitions first, since we'll need those in place when we set up the actual workflow. And for attendees new to Apex workflows, a task definition is required for every human task activity. And we'll walk you through that now. So I'm going to come here and create a new task definition. We're going to call it access request. Now, there's only two types of task here, an approval and an action. An approval is, are you approving or rejecting whatever is coming into the workflow? An action task is you need to do something. And those are the only types of human in the loop activities that we need. And again, for any one of these, you always need a task definition. For the subject line, we're just going to put access request submitted for user. And we're going to come back and add the username dynamically. I'm going to show you how to do that. We'll keep the same static ID and priority. And for potential owner, this is who the task is going to get assigned to, right? So when I put my username in there, that means all of these tasks that come out of this workflow are going to get assigned directly to me. I'm also going to make myself a business admin of the task definition, which means I'll see everyone coming through, even if I'm not specifically assigned to it. Let's go ahead and create this task. All right, and let's just kind of quickly review it. So we got most of our information. I will need to check this. The initiator can complete because I'm the one that's going to be initiating the workflow and approving it. This is usually for separation of duty, so the same person that creates it doesn't approve it, but in this case, I will need it. I'm double checking that, yep, my potential owner and business administrator are both tied to my login to my Apex app right now. And we want to create a task details page. This page is automatically created by Apex to showcase what has happened with the workflow. And all you need to do is create this button. It will grab the next available page number in your app. And that's all we need to do. We have now created a task definition to approve or reject any system access coming in from a user. Next, let's move on to workflows. So again, workflows are just under shared components. I'm going to go to create. And immediately it gives you the whole outline of the workflow. I'm going to start at the top. So first I'm going to give the workflow a name. We're just going to call this user access workflow, and I'm going to give this one a static ID. This is going to come in useful later. Next, I'll go to the actual workflow. I'll give it a version number. It's good practice 1.0. And within this workflow, we know we need to have one parameter fed into it. So I'm going to right click on the workflow, create parameter. So what are we passing in here? Well, we're going to be passing in the username, right? And I'm also going to give it a business-friendly name. It's going to be a varchar. It is going into the workflow. You have multiple values here, multiple options, whether they're going in and out, because we also have a new activity to invoke another workflow. So sometimes these values can be going in or out. In this case, we want this parameter to go into the workflow and we want it to be required. And then I just want to add a few participants. A minimum of one participant is required here. So there's two different types from a workflow level. You can be the workflow owner or the administrator. We'll start off and we'll just do workflow owner, and I'll put myself. We're going to create, I'm also going to be the administrator. Whoops. Admin. And then I'm going to also add Shane as a workflow administrator. And I'm just going to put his login. All right. So now we've added most of the components to the workflow. We've added our participants. We've renamed everything. We've given our parameter name. It's time to now work on the actual activities. So let's move over to the diagram builder. I'm going to give myself a little bit of room to build out this workflow. Okay. So the first block in here is I actually want to write some code. And I really want to add each user that gets added to this workflow. I want to add them to a control table. So add to control table. And the reason we want to do this later on in part 2 of this session, when we have a reoccurring job looking for users at our REST endpoint, we don't want them to be grabbed every single time and sent through the workflow. So we need a control table to know which ones have already been sent through the workflow process. And to do this, very simple. I've already created a little table here. Let me just show you the script. It's a simple insert statement. And I'm just basically populating the system access request table. And I'm populating it with the new workflow parameter that we just created, that username parameter. I'm just feeding it into here and it's going to add it to this table. So that's our first step. And if I go over to Object Browser, here's our system access request table. So this will start getting populated as these workflow comes in. See, so it's empty right now. All right, let's add the next activity. This is going to be the human task. So this is really going to review request. And now for definition, this is why I create the task definitions first, right? It's asking you which task definition you're going to use here. Well, our access request one. For our purposes today, I do need the initiator, which is me, to be able to complete. And I'm going to pass in a few other values. One, I'm going to pass in a primary key, which is going to be my username. And you might not have noticed, but as soon as I added this definition, the definition knows it's an approval task. And when you have an approval task, the system automatically generates a few variables for you. The task outcome, was it approved or rejected, and who approved it. And we're going to populate these variables right now. For the outcome, for my version variable, I'm going to say I'm tying my task outcome to it. And for the owner, I'm going to use my other version variable of approver. Now we don't have time. You can create as many variables as you need, including as many parameters as you need. We're not going to really go into more of them today, but this is one way that these variables can be utilized. They're also going to come in handy a little bit later. All right, so we have completed our human in the loop activity. Next, we need to have a switch, right? We need to know, did they get rejected or approved? So we'll bring up our switch and we'll just say approved question mark. Now, when you use a switch, there are many different ways to determine how it goes down the next leg of the journey in the workflow. For our purposes today, we want to use the check workflow variable. And more specifically, we want to check the variable of the task outcome. Remember, that's going to hold the value if it got approved or rejected. So we'll say check workflow variable and compare which one. Well, we want our task outcome. So now this switch is ready to view what the task outcome is and then pass it down to the next step. So I'm going to create a connection and we'll drag this right to our end. And on this connection itself, we need to configure this for the switch. First, I'm going to say the name approved. That is simply for readability. See how it says approved there? Only readability right there. I could have said yes, right? You can basically see approved question mark, yes. So that is just so you can understand the workflow better, but I'll switch it back to approved. And what do I want this condition to be? Equal to approved. That right there will now send any approvals down this path. And if it is approved, we want to execute one more script. So I'm going to bring up my execute code up here. And this one is going to be add user to system. Now for this part, I'm not actually going to write code to add them to a system, but I want you to just think about this for a second. At this step, I could easily write SQL or PL SQL to add this user and user information to any object in the database that this application has access to. You could also say, hey, I can call any REST API that I want to set up through PL SQL, or if you set up the REST API formally in Apex. Remember, Apex loves working with REST. So if you maybe have a SaaS system where a user needs to be added, I'm sure there's an API for it. You can just call the API right from this step. So we're not actually going to do anything, but I just want to kind of showcase how this could work. So at this point, we still want to add one more connector for the rejected. So I'm going to call this one rejected is equal to rejected. And we're just going to drag this over to the ending. And there we go. Make it look a little bit neater. I'll shrink this down a bit. And we should now have a fully uh, working workflow here. And I'm just going to come over here. And I do like to rearrange these a little bit just for readability purposes. It really doesn't actually have any matter. It matters what's on the diagram. But at this point, we have a workflow. So let's go over and try to test it out. But first, we're going to need to add it to our page process. So we're going to save that. And let's go to our start workflow page. We'll edit this and add the process. New process. We'll definitely want it above the clear page. And this is going to be start workflow. What type? Well, a workflow. Which one? The user access workflow. That's the one we just created. Now, see right here, parameters popped out because we said the workflow requires parameters. So like everything else in Apex, it makes it very easy for you to populate that parameter. I'm going to click on it. Typical options right here. This should all be standard for any Apex developers out there. And I'm just going to say, no, I want you to, from our page item, P2 username, go ahead and populate that workflow. That should be all we need. Let's go and see if this works. All right. So I'm going to run my first workflow, and we're just going to say pete@oracle.com. All right. Well, what happened? Did the workflow work? I mean, I know I was assigned the task, so how do I get to see the tasks that I was assigned? Well, that's where we start bringing in other components that make this whole entire workflow process possible. I'm going to come back to my application, and we're going to create some pages. First, we're going to create a unified task list. This component is designed for Apex workflows and allows you to view all tasks that have been assigned to you within your workspace. So we're just going to call the page My Tasks. And there's a few flavors of it. We have the My Task. This is for if you're the potential owner of a task that you can basically approve or deny in our scenario. If you're the admin, so these are for administrators. So we're also going to create this page in a minute. And then there's another flavor of this where you might want to give the user that's submitting the workflows access to see which ones they submitted. And that would be the initiated by me page. So we're just going to do that, keep the rest of the defaults, create the page. And let's go ahead and run that. And there we go. My task is it automatically is going to show any task assigned to me in the workspace. So right away, we basically have our approval task here. We can approve or reject it right from here. But if I click on the link, it gives me some more information about it, right? Some history on it. I can add some comments. And depending on your role, I'm also the task definition admin. So I have a few more features here, but these are some of the tasks that you can have as a workflow owner and a workflow task administrator. For this one, we're just going to go ahead and say approve. Okay, well, it's gone. Well, what if I'm a workflow or a task admin and I want to see all of the tasks that came through this? Well, we're going to create another page for that. Oops. Let's go create page. We're going to do one more unified task list, but we're going to do the admin one this time. So we'll call this one admin tasks. Keep all the rest of the defaults. Run that. And there we go. You can see it's completed. So again, my task, I already did the work, so it's out of my queue. But as an admin tasks, you see all the same information that we saw before, and that means you're the owner. So as more and more of these come in, the admin will see all of them. Now, well, what happened to the rest of the workflow, right? This is just the task. What about the workflow? Well, that's the other object we need to create now. We're going to create a page, and now we're going to use the workflow console. And again, we have our three different flavors. My workflows, whether you're an admin, whether you've been initiated by me. So we'll do my workflows. And this one comes with a detail page, which is very important. All right, so this is going to create two pages right here. We'll go ahead and run that. And there's my workflow. Look, it completed successfully. right? So this entire workflow got completed. So let me click into it for a minute. And look what this was built by the system, right? You don't have to code any of this. This is all part of the wizards of the workflow engine. It gives you every step or activity in your workflow. It tells you where it is, where it's held up. Remember those variables earlier? Pete, we know Pete approved it. So we have both those. There was the parameter we set in there. We have history, and whether you were or not, you even have a workflow diagram. This will show you where the workflow is, which path. It even tells you, look, it took the approved path. I know it might be a little small for you out there, but it's a really great way for troubleshooting and just taking a look at what path any workflow might take. Let's go ahead and create one more. But actually, before I do that, you see this, see these tasks? I want to add the user. I want to make this a little bit friendlier so I know who this is for. So I'm going to add a dynamic value to hold the username. If I come over to task definitions, I'm going to open that back up. And I'm going to use a substitution string. Anyone working in Apex should be used to substitution strings. There are many substitution strings for Apex workflows specifically. This one I'm using is going to call the current primary key for that flow. So it's going to dynamically put that in there. And not to mention all this information we're showing here, even though this is being recorded, we are going to set up a GitHub that will have all the scripts that we're going to be showing today. So I'm just going to apply those changes to that task definition. I'm going to kick off one more workflow. We'll say Kate at Oracle. Start the workflow. Let's look. All right, look. See how that's a little bit nicer now? We've just made it a little more dynamic. We know who the user is coming in here. And before I approve or reject it, let's go look at my workflows. All right, so now we have two of them. And see, one of them is still active. If I click on it, look at that. It tells you where it's waiting, right? So this is all happening dynamically. So it's in the step where it's waiting for the review request to happen. So we're just going to leave it there for a minute. And you can also see, obviously, I'm not going to get into them, but as a workflow admin, you do have several other options to suspend and terminate these workflows. Now, I want to create two more pages, and then we'll be done creating some pages. I want to create a workflow console for admins. So we'll use the admin option. So this is admin workflows. So I'll create that and the details page. And what if you want to monitor all of your workflows within here? Well, we provide you another handy page, include a dashboard page. And we're just going to call this our workflow stats, right? It will give us a lot of stats about all the workflows happening directly within this application. So this is going to create three different pages. Just going to hit create page. All right, taking an extra second there. Okay, once this comes up, we'll let this run. All right, let's run this. So now we have my workflows, admin workflows, and workflow stats. So I want to show you workflow stats really quickly. So see, this is a built-in page for you. It shows all the workflows by state. We have our one active and our one completed. You can click it, get some information on it. Here's our active workflows. You can even see any that have been faulted in here. And you can see how long are they taking? Well, if I want to look maybe in minutes, this is how long right now my few workflows that I have in here are running. So very powerful page to understand what is happening in a workflow. Now, one of the things I want to do before jumping into part two of this is go over to SQL commands. This whole entire page is being driven by views, system views, to support the Apex workflows. If I come over to SQL commands, I'm going to pull up some saved ones. This is one of the most powerful views that comes with workflows. If I run this, this is going to show me all workflows in my workspace, right? I have a bunch of different applications in here. If I want to run it just for my application, there we go. There's my two workflows. I'm application 500. You can see the application name, a lot of information. And look at here. It tells you one of them has been completed. One of them is still active. It gives you a lot of metadata And that's exactly what these charts are being built off of. They're being run off of these views. So, and I want to run one more. We have an activities one. So to run the activities one, you just grab any workflow. I'll grab this workflow ID. I'll put it in there and I'll use the Apex workflow activities view. We'll run that. And look at this. This is our, I gotta go start, add to control table, review request, approved, add user to system. This is every step in our workflow. You can see they've all been completed. So there are many other views. We are going to put a link to the documentation once this is posted online to all these documentations that we reference here. But this is a great way for troubleshooting any workflows or even building more sophisticated monitoring tools for your workflows. So I wanted to make sure to showcase that for you. Okay, that is, I believe, pretty much everything for part one, right? We were able to look at some of the views, we built some tables, we ran the workflows, we saw them work. Next, and what hopefully a lot of people came here for is, well, how do you do this from a database? So first, let's talk about what data source I'll be pulling from. I am using an OCI or Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, just user group, right? You have users in there and then you have groups of users. You can see in this one group that I've created, I have 3 different users. And the intent is to call the API for this group, loop through each of these users, and then create a workflow a process for each one of them to have their system access reviewed. So that's my data set. This is what I'm calling via REST. If I come over to SQL Developer Web, I'm going to bring over my script. And I'll kind of walk you through some of this. So this script is literally going to call the REST API and trigger workflows, but I'll walk through it a little bit. This first part, these are just some of my REST API endpoints that I need to be able to make the call. Whenever calling anything in OCI, you do need to set up a credentials. Now, again, we will put links in documentation to how to set up credentials if you're interested in doing this. But my credentials have already been set with my private key and fingerprints. We do need to capture the API response, and the API response is going to come in the form of JSON. And of course, we're just going to grab the user's name to kick off the workflow and pass that name down to the workflow engine. This is just making the REST call. This CLOB is holding the JSON response. Now, if you're not familiar with working with JSON within Oracle Database or Apex, it couldn't be easier. We have a couple different functions, and the one I'm using is called JSON table. This will also be in the documentation. This allows you to query JSON, whether it's in a collection, whether it's coming back from an API response, whether it's sitting natively in a row in a table. You can query JSON naturally, even multiple nested files. Makes it very easy. So what this is doing is going to loop through all of my, hopefully, all my 3 users here. And for each user, I'm going to set the username. For these purposes, I will print them out to make sure it ran. And then this is the part that I really want to get to. This portion, it's what's triggering the workflow. Let me walk you through that. First, we set the variable to the workflow ID as a number, and I just set an app ID. We know this is app 500. We need this in a few places, so I decided to put it up here. Now, before you can run a workflow, which is down here, you need to create a session. Even though you're not logging directly into Apex, a session is required to run the workflow. So to create a session, you pass in the app ID, any page number that exists, and an authorized user of that app. We already know I'm an authorized user. Once you've done that, then this is all it takes to trigger the workflow remotely, if you will. The components are you need an application ID again, which is our 500. You need a static ID of the workflow. User access workflow right here. That's where this is being called. That's why this is so important. This user access workflow static ID is getting referenced there. We're passing in a primary key, which is our username. And then you can pass in any number of parameters, right? Our primary key and our parameter are the same. I realized that, but for showcasing purposes today, I wanted to show you how else to put parameters in here. And this is the syntax to load one or more parameters. And the trick to it is on your parameter, each parameter that you've set up is going to have a static ID. Ours is username. If I come back to workflow, and I look at this, there's my static ID for my parameter for my workflow. So you just have to target the static ID for these. And then, of course, you're passing in the value. And then finally, we're just going to delete the session to keep the memory clean. Now, one thing to note is a little bit different. If you've built workflows in the past, you can build them in development. You can be running them while you're building and developing them, but the workflow itself does not have to be activated. In order to use this functionality, the workflow must be activated. So I'm actually going to run it so you can see the error, and then I'm going to activate the workflow. So let's go ahead and run this, see if this works. Right there. Okay. Workflow user access has no active version. So I was expecting this, so this is good. That just means we have to go to our workflow and activate the actual workflow. So now we have one that's active. We're going to save it. We're going to run this script. And now again, what am I expecting? I am expecting this script to call a REST API that will loop through all of these names and then enter them into their own workflow. So let's go ahead and try to run this. There we go. All right, so I printed out the names that it found. Those should look familiar. It all ran. Now, if I'm lucky, if I come over here and look at my tasks, there they, oh, I should have approved this other one. There are the three names, right? So they got pulled directly from that REST endpoint and passed into the workflow engine. So that is ultimately what I wanted to cover for this portion of it. And just to remind you is think about it on both sides of this. We can be pulling from anything REST source, anything in the database. You could be grabbing anomalies, data quality issues, and then throwing them into an enterprise grade workflow engine for auditing, for compliance, for accountability, right? And they can all be tracked, monitored, taken action on, and it's pretty simple to set up. So with that, I'm done with parts 1 and 2, and I'm now going to pass it on over to Shane.
Awesome. Thank you, Pete. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the work that Pete has done, and we are going to start to build on top of it. What we can do is we can go into the application that Pete was working on. We're going to go back over to shared components. And the first thing we're going to do is I have created an email template within this application in order to save us some time here. And so let's take a look at that email template. The email template is nothing more than just some HTML with some placeholders. So you can see here, there's an HTML email that's going to go out. It has placeholders such as username, task description, as well as an approve or reject link. The ultimate goal here is that what we want to do is allow our users, once a task has been assigned to them, we want to send out an email following that template. In the email, there will be links on approve or reject buttons respectively, where once the user clicks on the link, they are directed to a REST API endpoint that I've also set up here inside of Apex. And once they access that API endpoint, it will run a PL SQL procedure in the background that will then approve the task. The idea here is that a user from their email client can approve. It will open up a window, approve the task for them without them actually having to log into Apex. One important note about just allowing public API endpoints, I've secured this down by using a token. So when I send an email out to the user, I am generating a random token and storing that in the database. Once a user accesses the link, that one-time use token is validated. And only if it passes, then I'm going to process the rest of the procedure. And we're going to walk through all this together. So first, you saw the email template. The email template has a static ID of user request template. So we'll refer to this static ID here in just a bit. I'm going to go to the task definitions. We'll use the one that Pete has already created. And when I click into here, I'm going to change the potential owner and the business administrator to myself. just so it is sending those tasks over to me. And on top of that, in case we need to debug this, I will be able to look at the business administrator side of this. Now, I know a question did come up a second ago in the Q&A about multiple potential owners. You could certainly have multiple potential owners here. You can add multiple static owners, or you can have a SQL query that returns a pool of owners. What happens in that case is that task is available to be actioned upon by any of those potential owners. So I'm going to go ahead and apply changes, and I'll go back into here. And I'm going to now look at this actions tab. So we have participants, parameters of your task, and then actions down here. So within the actions, I'm going to create another action here, or I guess my first action. The goal here at this step is that once a task is created, I immediately send an email. You can send emails from within the workflow itself, and it does not need to be directly inside the task like I'm doing. However, when the workflow creates a task, it effectively pauses the workflow and it waits for that user who owns the task to take action on the task. So it waits for their action in order to decide which path to go down. For that reason, because I want the email to be sent at the same time the task is created, and I don't want to send it after the user takes some sort of action, I'm going to put it right here. So here we can just say generate token and create email. Now there is a built-in email option here. So you can do this via low code using substitution strings and using the same template. However, because I'm using the one-time use token, I'm going to say generate code or execute code. On event, I'm just going to set this to create. So as soon as the task is created, I want to execute this code. And let's walk through this code together. So first, I am going to define some variables. The goal of this entire PL SQL block that we're going to write is to log which task was created and also send out the email. So I had declared a couple of variables. I'll go into a little bit more detail about what these variables are once we get to them. I'm also going to create the base link, approval link, and reject link. This is the link that we're sending via email. And then I'm going to create a placeholders. The placeholders is used to replace the substitution placeholders inside of my email template. So with those variables defined, let's go ahead and start writing our PL SQL. So firstly, I want to generate my random token, right? So I'm using a DMS crypto random bytes. So this is going to create a random string, 32 bytes. Think of it just like a very long secret code. After I get that, I'm going to actually convert that raw token to a hexadecimal string. So this is this raw to hex function. And now this string is represented, or the token is represented by using numbers and letters. This will be easier to send via email. And instead of storing the, I guess, plain text token in the database, I'm going to go off of the raw token, not the second token I generated, but the raw token, and use, again, the dbms crypto hash to run this algorithm. And again, think of this like a secure summary of the original token, right? So later I'm going to validate, does this token that I'm sending via email and this token from the database match in order to process the request? After that, I can go ahead and I can grab the task ID. Now you saw earlier, Pete had used something called Apex Task PK, which gives you the detailed primary key of the task. I'm instead using Apex Task ID, which gives me the actual primary key of the task. So this primary key is the system generated key. It's how I'm uniquely identifying which task that I'm looking for. Once I get the primary key of the task, I will insert into my temp table. So this table is actually a table that I am going to just recreate right here really quickly. So if I go to my SQL scripts, I have a script here that will drop the table and then recreate it. But this is what the table structure looks like. So it contains things like task ID, the token hash. It also has things like, has the token been used and at what time it was used at. And then there's just a trigger at the bottom for audit purposes. So let's go ahead and run that. So now that the table has been dropped and recreated, I will continue. So I'm going to insert my task ID. I'm going to insert email table, email task approvals. I'm going to insert the user that I'm assigning this to, as well as my token, when it's due, and the flag. So once that's taken care of, we can talk about our base link, approval link, and reject link. So the base link is coming from a REST API endpoint that I have created. The approval and reject link are taking that base link, and it's just appending on the task ID, the token ID, and the outcome. The only difference is, of course, this outcome changes between approved and rejected. Now, this base link, that's going to be coming from over here. So if I go to RESTful services, there is a REST API endpoint that I've set up that calls the same URL. There's a lot of things that this is doing behind the scenes, but we're going to walk through this in just a minute. I just wanted to show you where the actual URL is coming from. And again, I'm just appending these query parameters onto the end of this base link, which is my URL, my REST API endpoint. Now, since I'm using the email template, I need to populate L placeholders. L placeholders is containing a JSON string of all of my placeholders within my email template that I showed you at the very beginning. So username, task description. Now, this L placeholders itself has some placeholders, right? You can see here, reject link is a placeholder, due date is a placeholder, because these sort of things are dynamic in nature, right? I didn't want to hard code them in here, especially because the approval and reject link are based on the task ID. So then I will just use a simple replace to replace this and look for this string inside of here and replace it with my actual link. So what I end up with is a JSON string that contains all the placeholders from my email template. Finally, I can go ahead and I can do a Apex mail send and an Apex mail push queue, and I can put an end right here. So what this is doing is calling the email template. It's passing in the placeholders that I defined above. This is my sample Gmail account that's just open over here. And this is my authorized email that I'm sending emails from. So two quick notes here. One is, in order to send emails, you need to have an approved email sender. There's a lot of blogs on how to set this up, but this needs to be an approved sender in Apex or at the database level. The other thing is that if you try to use DBMS crypto in your environment, you may need to grant some permissions before you're allowed to call this package. And we'll validate all that code and we'll say, okay. So because I know the email sometimes takes some time to come through, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go over to the handler. I'm going to change one thing in here so that this is 500, which is the app that we're looking for. I'll come back and walk through this code in just a second. But I want to go ahead and I want to actually run the workflow so that we have a chance for the email to be sent through. And I'll say start workflow. So that workflow has now started. Let's now go take a look back at the workflow. So I'll go out from task definitions. I'll go to shared components and I'll go to workflows. Now I actually don't need to change anything here on the workflow side. I just wanted to revisit what Pete had done, right? So it's calling the same workflow from the same page. It's adding users to the control table. It's creating a task. Within this task, what we just did is we're sending out an email. And then once the user clicks on the email, it processes the request and then it can continue on here where it decides if it's approved or rejected. So for that to work, we need to take a look at where the email is directing our users to. And that is, once again, back over here under our resource handler. So when you come over here, and this is located inside of RESTful services, Apex has a sample module that you can take a look at in order to figure out more on how to set up REST API endpoints. But what I'm doing is I'm getting a couple parameters from the URL. So this is the base URL. And then if you remember, we're appending task ID, outcome, and token onto the end of it. So I'm getting those parameters here. I'm checking to validate if the token has been used, who the current owner is, and what the secure token is in the database. And then I'm grabbing the workflow ID. We're not going to use the workflow ID for anything right now. I just wanted to put it here in case it needs to be referenced that the workflow has been complete or something like that. So I'll do a quick query to my database to store those items in local variables, and I'm just comparing against task ID. Here you can see if I create one more tab here, and I go to my object browser, you'll be able to see what the email task table looks like. So this is the table right here. So currently we will have one record because I already triggered the workflow. It has not been used, and this is null, meaning that, right, no one's accessed the REST API yet, and that's the workflow ID. So that's what the table looks like. So back over here to our resource handler. Now for our actual owner, one thing to note is only the current owner of a task can be able to take action of that task. So if the task is assigned to me, Pete is not going to be able to approve it, right? However, I'm selecting that actual owner from this Apex task table. This is an internal table that Apex has available, or internal view that Apex has available to you. The owner could have also come from my username in this table. I just wanted to show you that this Apex task view, again, exists, and there's information in it that you can access. Then I need to process a couple things, right? I need to check, has the token been used, which is this, and does the token match what's in my database? Remember, this is the token coming from the database. This is the token coming from the email. So if those match, then I want to process. So just like Pete showed you, you will need to create an Apex session. The session will be for my app, and the username for the session will be the same one who owns the task. Then I can approve the task if the user clicked the approve button, and I can reject the task if the user clicked the reject button by using these predefined APIs that are available to you under the Apex Human Task package. In the case that it's neither approved or rejected, I'll need to handle my exception over here. Then I'm going to move down and I will just update my underlying table, right? I want to make sure that we now note that the token has been used and that we are going to record the timestamp on which it's used. If you want to collect more information, I just put these here just as commented out because I don't have columns for them currently. But you can also collect the agent from the browser. So you can see like what kind of device the user has accessed the API from. You can also collect the connecting IP address for maybe audit purposes or additional security, however you want to handle it. And this code up to line 48, so right where I am right now, will work completely fine and they will get the job done. However, if the user clicks on the link, they'll be greeted by just a blank web page that tells them nothing, although it is actually working in the background. So below, I have put together some HTML, which is just going to present a simple message to the user that says, thank you for approving, thank you for rejecting, or maybe in your else case, the task was invalid or the status was invalid. And then finally, you will be able to check whether the token is invalid by saying, has it already been used? Or maybe the two tokens do not match, right? This is not equal to, do not match. And in that case, you'll present them with a different error. So with all that, we can go ahead and save that. So if I go over here and refresh, it looks like that email did come through at 11:50. So just now it came through. Before I click on it, I want to show you that if I go to admin tasks, since now I'm the admin, this was, or better, admin workflows. This was initiated 5 minutes ago. And just like Pete showed you, it's currently waiting on review request. Review request is our human task. So it's waiting for human approval. Same thing with my task, created 6 minutes ago. There's a task assigned to me. I can approve or reject from here the exact same way you've always been able to, but let's take a look at the email. So this is what the email is going to look like. And there'll be two links, approve or reject. Now, if you click the link, it takes you to a screen that just says you have approved the task, we've captured a response. And if we go back to our object browser, this was the old state of the table, right? If I refresh, this is the new state of the table. The token has now been used, and we've captured the timestamp at which the token was used. Likewise, if I try to click on that exact same task again, and let's say I've already approved it, the task is complete, the workflow is complete, but I try to go back and reject it, I'm going to get an error message that says, hey, by the way, this token is invalid, and I'm not going to do anything with it. Now, let's try that one more time. Or you can see here, even if I refresh the screen, that task that was created 6 minutes ago has been disappeared because it was approved. Likewise, if I go to the admin workflows, this is the one that I just created, it's now complete. It's completed all the steps, and I did not have to approve or reject it from Apex. The very last thing I want to show is if I send another workflow through. We will wait for the email over here. And while we're waiting for the email, there's two quick things I want to talk about. One is essentially things learned. This entire thing can be done via a PL/SQL process on a public page. What we found when working with this solution for the first time was that if you do it via a public page, then Apex will, when you click the link, Apex will take you to that public page and it will automatically create an Apex session for you. Will still work the exact same way. However, if your user is already using Apex in some other tabs and they have something they're working on, and then they click the link, they're assigned a new session ID within the same browser, which will then time out some of their other session IDs. As I was working on this, I also came across a blog that was published by PM just maybe a couple days or a week ago, which covers a very, very similar situation where you're able to interact with tasks from outside of Apex. However, their approach was slightly different, right? They decided that once the email gets sent to the user, when they click the link, instead of redirecting to a REST API endpoint, it's going to go to a send email within their client itself. They were using Outlook, and it's going to send an email to a inbox. Apex then is going to periodically monitor that inbox and look for tasks and see if the user approved or rejected it. So it's a great blog. I definitely think you should check it out. Like many things in Apex, there's a handful of ways to complete the same thing. So I'll put the link to that blog in the chat here in just a minute as well. The very, very last thing I want to show you is just what the link looks like. So here, if I copy this link address instead of clicking it and I put it in my browser, you can see here we have our base link, task ID, token, and then the outcome equals approved. However, if we modify the token, this token has not been used, but I'm going to provide a bad token, you get the same error. However, the task has not been altered, so I can still come back and actually approve the task the second time. So that's the solution I want to present to you today. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Pete, who's going to talk about the Code and Write program. The use case you saw today was actually from a customer through the Code and Write program, and this is kind of the solution that we helped them build together.
Great. Awesome session, Shane. Thank you so much. So again, just going to take a few minutes to tell you about the Code Innovate program. Simply put, it's an enablement and training program for new and existing Oracle customers, supported by a team of deep dive engineers like Shane and myself. So what does the program offer? Well, we start by reviewing your strategic use cases, which require technology to solve. Then we pair that use case up with our engineers who have deep experience developing on the required service or services and potentially with similar use cases. And with our guidance, we help your organization deliver a first-pass prototype of the desired solution. Let's take a closer look at the framework of the program. These are 1 week long virtual events. We typically facilitate these through Zoom. And you and your teams are driving the development. In a sense, we are just over your shoulder showing you how to build out the solution. And a single event runs for 4 hours a day for a total of 20 hours in the week. And lastly, there is no cost associated with this program. Here are the basic guidelines for an event. We look for two things when understanding your use case. Do we have the necessary skills and support? And we do support most OCI PaaS services. Second, can we fulfill the requirements in 20 hours? And I should mention that we can support multiple use cases or teams during a single event. As I mentioned before, an event runs Monday through Friday for 4 hours a day, and we could accommodate most start times. And we look to try to get 4 more participants from the customer side, and no prior knowledge on Oracle services is needed. We usually need about 3 weeks lead time to run an event, And let's take a quick look at what goes into a typical event setup. Once we've agreed on a suitable use case, we will determine an event week. Once established, we will work toward the week, and we will help you with any tenancy configuration, if needed. That may include things like provisioning services, setting up users, connecting to data sources, networking, and things like that. We also offer what's called a structured learning, which is essentially a training demo of the service or services we'll be utilizing throughout the event. Since many customers may be new to Oracle services, this is a great opportunity for participants to get some exposure to the tools they will be developing in. Then we have the event. If this program sounds like something you would be interested in exploring, there are several ways to get in touch with us. You can send us an email using the address on the screen. You can add your name and email right now in the chat and we'll grab it and we'll contact you quickly. Or if you are already working with an Oracle account manager, let them know about your interest in the program. They know how to get a hold of us. So thanks, and I hope to see you at an event soon. Back to you, Tara.
Great. All right. I will just wrap up now, and I think Pete will just keep answering a few of those questions in the chat if they do come through. But just want to say thank you again so much for joining us here today. This is an ongoing series, the developer coaching series. So we have these quite often. If you are interested in attending any more, they can be found at oracle.com/developer/events. And we do want to hear from you if you like this session, if there are any topics that you'd like to see from us going forward. So please do either copy this link or there'll be a short survey that pops up as you exit the Zoom today to share that feedback with us. So with that, thank you again, and we hope to see you at the next one. Thank you, everybody.